Okay. I'm Joe. He's Nick. And, okay, that music ran out pretty quickly there all of a sudden. I wasn't quite ready for that. Oh, the joys of live radio. You there, Nick?
Of course I'm here.
Okay. I didn't hear you laughing at me in the background, so I wasn't entirely sure what was going on there. Oh, dear.
I still had my mic off.
Okay, so I'm Joe. He's Nick, and you're listening to the Nick and Joe Show. And I'm at the studio, the broadcast center here in Ottawa. Nick is over in Bunker K in Killaloe, Ontario, at the flagship studio for our terrestrial broadcast. Oh, dear.
Pretty good, yep.
Hey, did it ever get hot today? It's like that global warming is really hitting us now, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you would think it's coming to summer or something.
I know, it's just all of a sudden.
And just remember, our Australian listeners are now going into a deep freeze.
Well, I don't know.
Or at least their version of one.
Our Antarctica, for sure, our Antarctica listeners.
Absolutely.
I don't think they get a deep freeze in Australia.
No, for them, it's a deep freeze.
Okay.
For us, it's shorts and T-shirts.
I will concede that point for sure. Yes, we do have listeners in Australia and in New Zealand. So if you're listening live down there and not on the podcast, I'm not sure how the international date line works, but
I think they're a day ahead of us.
Yeah, a day ahead of us or a day behind us or something
now.
like that. I don't know. All I know is it's...
I could look it up if you wanted me to.
No, let's not bother. Let's get into more important stuff, like the Beijing Winter Olympics.
Yes. The Beijing Winter Olympics. I would have thought that this was a foregone conclusion, that given what we know now about China and its human rights record, 1 million people in basically Nazi-style concentration camps, forced labor, all the horrible things we thought died back in the 1940s have been brought back in China. Now, I won't go as far as saying they have incinerators and gas chambers, but they do have re-education camps. Actually, it's probably closer to Stalin than it is to Hitler. His gulags were always called re-education camps. And if you survived the re-education, there wasn't much left of you. Most people, when they went there, didn't come back again. But this is what's going on in China. So the question becomes, why are we allowing China to have... Because did they not host the last Summer Olympics?
Well, the last Summer Olympics were actually supposed to be, if I'm not mistaken, in Tokyo. And they were supposed to be last year, and they were postponed because of the COVID pandemic.
Okay, but the one before that was Beijing, right?
I believe it was. The Beijing Summer Olympics were recent, yes.
So now we have a situation where we have a country that has no regard, holds two of our citizens basically hostages,
correct,
the two Kevins, and we're going to go and participate in the world's greatest sporting event hosted by them. No, you don't go to a party when your neighbor has your kids in his basement locked up and says you can't have them back. I'm sorry. That to me just blows my mind. And the rest of the world has suffered similar situations, whether it be internally by different populations within China or different expats from different countries around the world. We're not unique in that sense. They treat everybody like this. So why would we go to a party hosted by them?
Well, it's an excellent question, Nick, and it's not just okay. Well, let's back up a little bit and let's look at the historical record. And I'm going to invoke 1980, shortly after the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, which occurred late in 1979. And we made a decision, along with our allies, that one of the things that we would do to demonstrate our displeasure with the Soviet Union for having acted the way it did was we decided to boycott the 1980 Olympics, which were held in Moscow that year. And of course, the Soviets, the Western Warsaw Pact countries, the Soviet bloc countries,
satellites,
in a tit for tat, decided to boycott the Los Angeles Olympics.
84.
I believe it's the Los Angeles Olympics in '84.
The Rocket Man Olympics.
So, but the point is that we took a stand against the aggression of the Soviet Union. Now, the Chinese have not actually invaded another country over the course of the last few years. So, but they certainly have been acting with great aggression in the South China Sea with their neighbors. They've been very threatening. I mean, explicitly threatening to
Taiwan,
annihilate Taiwan if Taiwan, which is for all intents and purposes an independent country, but every time Taiwan tries to demonstrate or talks about its independence, the Chinese government in Beijing goes nuts and they threaten them with all kinds of military action and economic action, etc. So, certainly in that respect, I think you can make the case that the Chinese government, the communist Chinese government, has been acting as a rogue government. And then we look at the way that they've been treating their own minority populations, to the extent that it's now commonly accepted that the Chinese government has been perpetrating a genocide against the Uyghurs. So it's one wonders how far a government has to go today. It's not 1980. Okay, we don't have a Ronald Reagan waiting to run for president of the United States. We don't have a Margaret Thatcher occupying the prime minister's chair in Great Britain. So it's the question is, how far are we in the free world willing to be pushed before we actually take some kind of action that presumably these countries will care about? Now, I know there are people out there that are going to say they're not going to care, so why would we do it to them? I guess my response to that is, in the first instance, would be to say, well, if they don't care, then what are we doing, period, even participating? But you know what? They do care. And again, the example that I cite is the example of the Soviet Union that was deeply, deeply offended and hurt by the fact that the Western countries boycotted the 1980 Olympics, as evidenced by the fact that they boycotted the Los Angeles Olympics 4 years later. So these countries do care, just like National Socialist Germany cared about its image when it hosted the 1936 Olympics. And I would put to you that the Chinese government has been acting far worse at this point in time, both domestically and internationally, than the National Socialist government under Adolf Hitler was acting both domestically and internationally in 1936. So,
yeah, well, I think that anybody who says why would they care doesn't understand how China looks at itself in the world and the culture that surrounds the Asian subcontinent, and that is that saving face is everything. To embarrass someone publicly is one of the greatest humiliations you can inflict on them. Yes, they care. Like if they invite you to a party and you snub them by not showing up or acting in an insulting way, they care. So it's one of the most effective tools we have, short of military conflict, and I don't see anybody lining up to start that fight. It may someday come to that, but that's not what that's not where we're at right now. So to flip the bird to China and say, look, you're a horrible regime. We don't like what you're doing, and we are going to protest in this manner. And if you don't like it, too bad, so sad, bye-bye. That would inflict upon them real embarrassment on the world stage, and they can't stand that idea.
Yeah, and, especially Canada. Forget about the rest of the world. Why would we be sending athletes to Beijing to participate in the Winter Olympics when the Chinese government is holding 2 Canadian citizens virtually hostage under threat of death as retaliation for us in Canada basically following the rule of law here? And that is to say, with the this vice president or the president of Huawei, who has been under arrest and in detention in Vancouver, awaiting a final dispensation of her extradition process to the United States. Now, I'm sorry that's a lengthy process one way or the other, but what exactly do people want from us? I mean, this is a case where I'm going to give the Prime Minister, some credit. At least he's not capitulating on this question. They could have freed her. They could have found a way to, I don't want to say necessarily influence the judges on the case, or the judge on the case, but, these things happen, a quiet phone call or whatever. I mean, these guys in office right now have certainly not been particularly shy when it comes to crowding the ethical line on these types of things, but they haven't. They've basically taken a handoff on this case. They've taken a hands-off approach. They're letting the justice system work the way it's going to work, for better or for worse. So the Chinese government is holding these 2 fellows, Canadians, hostage, essentially, as I say, under threat of the death penalty on bogus, trumped-up charges, and still somehow or other, after I've given credit where I thought it was due, now I take the credit away and go, somehow or other, we can come up with the justification that we Canadians are going to continue to participate in this charade of sportsmanship in China. I mean, it's frankly, I find it absurd and not a little bit hypocritical. And I think that of all of the countries in the world that ought to be boycotting, that ought to be leading a boycott of the Beijing Winter Olympics coming up, I think that Canada should be at the front of the line.
Well, something, it doesn't surprise me that Canada isn't at the front of the line. This is the same nation that allowed Chinese officers in their military to train here in Canada to learn our winter combat techniques. This is the same country that sent troops over to China to celebrate their May Day. During the whole episode, those 2 episodes, the 2 Kevins were still in prison. And I can tell you this much about those 2 poor unfortunate souls.
Yeah, Michaels.
Now,
2 Michaels.
I don't know. Did I say Kevin's?
Yeah,
Michaels,
you said
yes.
Kevin's, yes.
The 2 Michaels. But they're not living anywhere near in the lap of luxury the way the vice president of Huawei is, even in detention here in Canada. I've seen some of the coverage of what her lifestyle's like right now. She can go shopping when she wants. She has to wear an ankle bracelet and be escorted, but that's about the only restriction. She stays in a very nice, beautiful home. Contrast that to a Chinese prison cell in hard labor, and there's no moral equivalency there at all. There's no way you could look at those and say, yeah, that makes sense to me. So I'm disappointed. I'm